fuck out of the way.
I guess we'll get started. Welcome, everyone, to this session. My name is John Kendrick, for those of you who I've not met, and my function in the Guild is of cyber secretary, not as talk show host. So I hope the session goes well. All I'm going to try to do today is get a sort of freewheeling discussion rolling. And if at any time any of you have any questions to ask of Lou Harrison, Chinner Young, or Bill Colby, please don't hesitate to ask, raise your hands, and I'd like to have a really good discussion amongst us all today. With us today are two of America's preeminent composers, Lou Harrison here in a nice green shirt, and Chinner Young next to me. I'm not going to go into any detail about their biographies because each of you have a packet there, and the biographies are nicely printed in there, and I really encourage you to read them because, of course, they are very interesting biographies. But what I would like to mention about these two men, in conversations with them and reading about them and listening to their music, I've been struck by the notion that they don't write music as purely craft or just to get a piece of music done. They both seem to reach really far down inside themselves for their music. Back in the, I believe it was in the late 40s, or when you moved from New York City, right? 47?
Well, when did I move back to New York City? From New York City?
From?
It would have been mid-50s.
Huh. Right. So he left New York City to go back to Aptos, which I believe is your first destination, or back to the East Coast anyway, and has a house on the West Coast in Aptos. And I believe the reason for that is that to get away from the hustle and bustle of New York, to find a place where you can work better.
You know, I had a major breakdown in New York, during which it was revealed to me that I'm not a New Yorker.
And so in California, right? He's finding his music, as far as I understand, and get from his music in nature, in the nature near his West Coast home, and in the nature of sound itself. Working with Bill Colby, who we are lucky enough to have here today, who is Lou's companion of many, many years, and with whom he has worked building instruments and experimenting with tuning systems and different modes. This work, and along with his study of the music of Indonesia and other Eastern cultures, are both byproducts of and means to finding his particular voice in music. Chinner Young here also reaches further down than just a pencil, or we talked about just reaching down to the bottom of a synthesizer keyboard. There's much more there to his music. He and I have had a number of talks on the telephone, and always what comes up to discussion is what is behind the music, what's behind the notes in the person of the composer. Chinner also has immersed himself in Eastern music, in his case, and that is his native Cambodia. These two men sitting here really connect in their study of Eastern music, but Lou came to Eastern music from a Western point of view, and Chinner came to Western music from an Eastern point of view. So perhaps in that intersection we might find some very interesting place for discussion. And I'm sure also as we discuss we'll learn a lot about their personal relation to sound and its manifestation in their music. This is a very important thing, sound, timbre, tuning, just the nature of sound itself. Both of these men have worked in dance. Lou a bit more than Chinner has a longer history of it anyway. But this afternoon session, moderated by Janisaurus, will go much more into the history of Lou's work with dance in, I think, the section of New York in the 30s and 40s. So in in this session, I want to avoid so much the historical aspects, but to deal more in the realm of the philosophical, theoretical, and practical nature of creating music, and sometimes not in relation to dance. So I'd like to take some steps, kind of bring ourselves back and think a lot about how music is created, and of course, also we will talk about music in relation to dance. Now, before I start out with any questions, I don't know if any of you have anything to say about that sort of long-winded introduction, but hopefully interesting. I'll just start out. I know Lou Harrison is at the moment writing a piece for Mark Morris.
I finished it.
He is. And I thought maybe you could just talk a little about that to get us rolling, how you started your conversations with Mark Morris. You just came up with the title for it, I know.
Yes, I was just told that the putative title is Rhymes with Silver. I have no idea what it means. But at any rate, Mark asked me to write a piece for him. And I was happy to do that because he's, I think, a magnificent choreographer, a magnificent dancer. And also, he's a trained musician. And that makes things a lot easier for a composer. At the same time, I didn't want to dominate the scene, so to speak. So the first thing I did for him was a kit. Oh, when we had a meeting, he came down, I think with Barry, I'm not sure, at any rate, to our house, and we talked about the question of the commission and what was it to consist in. Well, he didn't have a story, he didn't have a line, he didn't have anything about it, and I didn't either. So we decided actually that I was just going to go along and compose, and if I had any suggestions about choreography, fine, and if he thought of anything about music, fine. So we just do that. There was only one stipulation, and that was that I write for Yo-Yo Ma, which proved to be difficult because I'm not accustomed to writing for superstars. And so what do you do? Well, I wrote a lot of music for Mark Morris, a lot of it, one after the other, working up courage to write for Yo-Yo Ma, which I then finally embarked on and turned out a four-movement suite specifically for him. And of course, it scared everybody. I was really scared. So I sent him a movement, and I asked if what I was doing was okay. There were a few risks, as a matter of fact, which I knew about on the cello, and I took them, and that was one of the reasons I had to know. And he immediately said, "It's perfectly good for the cello, it's fine, thank you." And so that was okay. And so I could go on to do the rest of that thing. Well, there are four movements, and I believe in recent publicity that those have been detached and constitute now a suite. Whether that's the title for that suite or the rest of it, I don't know. But I started out with, and finally ended up with, a practice that I had, in effect, learned from Henry Cowell, which is a kit. I've done several of these, and the musical kits consist of maybe lines of melodies and lines of rhythm, but they share the same rhythmic structure, but you can mix them up. You can play melody number 1 with rhythmic line number 8 or something like that. And also some of them will connect very easily, the melodies, and some of the rhythms too. Some of them show great contrast as well. I've done this a number of times, and it does seem to work. Both the dancers and the musicians enjoy it because they can make whole new forms out of these basic structures. And of course, from Henry Cowell, I learned that music, large part of the world's music, consists of melody with some sort of rhythmic support, some sort of rhythmic accompaniment. And so to just make both those things and allow them to be assembled in a number of different ways, I call a kit. So the first thing I did for Mark was to make a kit. For that, it was just the piano and the percussionist. Then I wanted more, and I knew that the cello was coming up because yo-yo was part of it. And so then I asked him if I couldn't have a flute and an oboe, because in the theater you need some sort of penetrating sound. But I was persuaded that I should use the violin and the viola. So what finally ended up was a quintet of violin, viola, cello, piano, and percussionist. And so I wrote the thing for that. And then how to go on? Well, I decided to write in a set of dances. There were two movements in the first. The first one is this kit, fairly large and rapid. And the second one was a contrasting movement of piano and percussion, mostly the chimes and things of that sort, which is slow and has a medieval form of guttia. Then I made in a kit of a set of dances, six small dances, such things as a jig and musette, a romantic waltz, a foxtrot, and so on. And also I included an usul, because I know he's trained in Balkan dance and likes those irregular rhythms. And so I did an usul in the Turkish manner, dedicated to Prince Cantemir. And then a finale, a rounds. And then the suite. I finally worked up enough courage to write for yo-yo. So then there's a four-movement suite, too. And the end of that is also another kit. There's a number of melodic lines, and I made at the end of each one, it says, this can either be repeated, omitted, or go to line such and such. And so there's a great deal of possibility there. And that's only in 5 tones. So that's the completion of it. It's a fairly large work, actually, and can be arranged in a number of different ways. And he seems happy with it. I haven't heard from him directly, but his music director is pleased, and I've got a rehearsal tape which pleases me, except I didn't like the romantic waltz. It suddenly turned hard edge, and so I revised it, and now I think it's proper romantic waltz. I'm looking forward to all this. I don't know what's going to happen. I have no idea about the choreography. I just know that I feel sympathetic with Mark's kinesis. And so I wrote with that feeling in mind.
Did the dancers, did Mark Morris have any say in what of these hits or these melodies, how they were put together? Or are those choices that you make on your own? Or?
Oh, no, they can do it. That's the point of the kit. The musicians and the dancers can make choices. Also as to texture, for example, if the melodic line is going very fast and so on, it might be that they would choose a very sparse percussion part or piano part, and so on, so that there are many varieties possible. In the last one, I even recommended, if they wanted a perpetuum mobile, there are 3 that they could go between and just keep it going for as long as they wanted.
So
everybody has a chance.
And every performance will have slightly different music?
No, Mark will choose. He's the choreographer, and I'm expecting him to do that. If he doesn't, then that's his choice in the kit. Yeah. So, as a matter of fact, when I presented that kit to Yo-Yo Ma, he said, well, Mark will have a lot to say about this. But I must say that working with and for a dancer who is very well trained musically does liberate you a lot. You know that he can negotiate and is familiar with practically every delicate rhythm that you might think of, and can do it kinetically. So it's been a great pleasure. Since then, that's 2 commissions back. I'm plucking my way through this year. I had a commission from a Japanese shamisen player, which, when it's a serious instrument, is called sangen. And so I did a concert-size suite for her. And for that, I had to concentrate entirely on monodic music, just melody, that's all. And in a very limited range, too, so that I was limited as to range. The instrument gets less sonorous from the bottom string. It goes until it goes plink. there. So it was that concentration. Then the next piece, which I'm working on now, is a commission for Chinese pipa and string orchestra. And the pipa is the Chinese lute. So as I say, I'm plucking my way through this.
You said that you restricted yourself to 5 tones, and I assume in your earlier B songs, I think you restricted yourself to 5 tones. Is that true?
At least in some passages. It's probably not a restriction. I think it's
Right.
a liberation through limitation. Yeah, because when we count tones, sure we can get the number, but within a single tone, one can find a tiny wall in itself, like timbre, color, articulation, and certain expression.
Do any of those things, timbre or tuning or things like that, have any bearing on the choices you make in your composing, and especially in relation to, say, you're thinking about dance? Is that kind of a large question? I know that.
Lou is an expert in this one.
Well, I don't know about that, Jerry.
Or Bill.
Well, Bill has made a lot of instruments, and they have been used for dance accompaniments too. And Bill is the builder of the 2 largest American-built gamelons, one at Mills College and the other at San Jose State. And the one at San Jose State, the gamelon C. Betty, so named after Betty Freeman, the art patroness, who helped us with that, is recorded. You can hear that very well recorded, as a matter of fact, on recordings. Oh, so is the Mills gamelon, come to think of it. It's heard on the recording of my double concerto for violin, cello, and Japanese gamelon. Yes. So both of those 2 are available on recordings. Quite well recorded, I think, too. He's also built a multitude of other instruments, a droning drum of contrabass strings, after medieval style, and all sorts of things, many monochords, many various different things. Great help, musically. And for special things, if I need a special sound, I ask Bill to try for it. Sometimes I go out and start an instrument, and then he comes out and takes over.
Yeah, I met Lou 30 years ago, and found he was building instruments, and I thought it was something interesting to do. I'd been an electrician. This pin here, 50-year pin from my union I just got. But I was a very much musically inclined electrician, and found what Lou was doing was very fascinating. And so I used my ingenuity in making things work in my electrical profession. I applied it to musical things. And it's been a very interesting life doing this.
Jimmy, how does you just talked a little about 5 notes being a liberating thing and the world in each of those notes. How do you go about starting to find those 5 notes? How does that process work for you?
There are many ways to look at an art object. I think first of all, if we agree that technique come after, meaning technique is secondary, then we are talking about a much larger campus here. One way to tap on this thing, if you look at the 2 different dimensions. One is the creative dimension on the one hand, and on the other hand is daily life, like we are now at the panel in the same room, trying to balance your checking account and so forth, daydreaming, social things, so forth. I think if there could be a mastery, if there could be one thing that we ought to master, is the ability to manage to enter in the creative dimension and then exit out back and forth without damaging one's own art and humanity as a whole. So that's one way to say it. Now, to zero in to your question here, I think if it happened, a given passage of music happened to call for five tones, let it be that way. If it happened to be what people call dissonance or monotones or microtones and so forth, I think let it be that way. I don't think, when I said liberation, it was probably a Freudian slip, but when I think it over, I think it's good to say that. Simply you are not following the techniques, you're not too overwhelming about external world so much. Of course, you cannot be alone without any influence. Let me just add another one, a very simplistic type of statement. If we look at Western culture as to represent blue watercolor, and then we look at Eastern culture as to represent yellow color. When you mix together, you get green. It's hard, it's difficult to be green. And how much greener is really up to you, and that's what it is. If you are sitting in a room with someone, you have three people in that room. If you are sitting alone, you have two. And so you have to have a dialogue, exercising a dialogue within yourself. And needless to say, I think all of you have been doing that all the time. It sounds so simple, my answer is scary.
I'm more interested in the compositional process. How do you begin? I'm thinking mainly in terms of the mental process. Do you start with a vision, an idea, or do you mentioned the musical kit. Do you start writing, snippets first, and then your vision comes from what you've written, or do you have an idea in your head, and then you translate it into song?
Does everyone hear the question? He asks, I'm sorry, Marie Gordon asks how you, I don't know who he does the question to, either both of you, I'm sure, how you begin writing a piece of music. Do you start with a vision or an idea, or do you just begin writing a piece of music? That's basically what he asked, so I'll open that.
If we follow the idea that I propose that techniques come after, therefore there are only one thing that is remain. It is an empty space. It is space-time, empty space, emptiness, nothingness. How do you get something? That one ought to follow his or her own hints. I call it hints in a very simple, plain language, because when something is triggered or is being hinted to you, I think you ought to pay attention to that. If you try to deny that, is denied not only the self, but denied a much deep down collective type of consciousness, in a sense. When something is, when you receive a hint, then referring to what you said about compositional process, a hint manifests in which form? Is it in sounds, or is it in dance gesture, or graphical thing, or feeling, or emotion? And in my case, I don't try to write notes right away, because that particular moment might triggers what we can call it as the peak of inspirational timing. So the sketch can come up with words in my native language or English or sometimes it's spiral in dashes. Anything that represents the totality of that essence. And so then thereafter to make it sound easy to you, I just had to swim in and spend the next 6 months and put nuts and bolts.
How do you negotiate these waters as far as from the empty space to
Well,
sound?
it varies. Of late, this is about the last 4 or 5 years, I've been undergoing commissions, which means that there are time restrictions, time deadlines up against which I'm battling, and also instrumental and or vocal restrictions. And those I take into account right away. I also have always imagined some sort of audience. And normally I am writing for an audience, which means I am also part of the audience because I hear what the audience hears. But at any rate, a commission lands on me like a ton of bricks on my back, and it's terrible. And then very gradually I try to be sturdy enough to think up something that might be appropriate or dare something, and then gradually the piece opens up. And mostly it does that because I make an architecture for it. If it is if it's to be a suite form is very good for me. And the present concerto I'm writing, I decided instead of 3 movements, I'd make it 5. And I'm even exploring something because the 4th movement I couldn't pick up a form for it, architecture, you know. So I'm literally making bits and pieces. I will call it bits and pieces too. And again, it comes out of the nature of the instruments that I'm writing for. After the shamisen concerto, which was a single melodic line for 20 minutes, I started out to write in the same way for the peacock, and I realized, you've got a string orchestra to deal with here too, you know, so this changes things. And so I laid out an architecture of 5 movements, and also I decided again to use something I'm having lots of fun with over the last decade or so, and that is using 6-tone modes instead of 5 tones. They interestingly preserve the nature of the 5-tone mode, which is their basis, but still you've got another tone and a couple more intervals to play with. And so I'm using 6-tone modes for the most part. I started out the peacock concerto by writing directly chromatically, and then I thought, oh, that may not work. And so I consulted with Ruman, who's going to be the soloist, and wrote out for a series of modes and asked if they were comfortable for her on the peacock, because I didn't want to write anything miserable for the soloist. And she tried them and said, yes, you're fine, there's no problem. So I'm using those. That means from architecture to actual musical modality. And then the question of the expression comes up in the nature of whether it's a largo or whether it's a presto or something of that sort. And that means different formations too. And then again, I really don't know these instruments. And I do know the basic tuning of the peacock. And that means I can figure out imaginarily, because I have touched instruments, I can figure out what would work by both drones and by chordal schemes, and what could be gone across this way and so on. I'm in no sense a pipa virtuoso. I can imagine. And so I'm in the process of doing that. I have no problem with the string orchestra because I've written for it before. And my own problem there is not to overwhelm the pipa. Again, it's a matter of balance. And I'm thinking of tone colors that will mix or alter in some way the string orchestra or play with it. Well, the one thing I don't like about the pipa is the continuous tremolo, just continuous. And I thought, well, I could be avant-garde and ask her to play E flat for 15 minutes or something, you know. But I decided no. And then suddenly it dawned on me from my own Western background, the Neapolitan mandolin does that all the time. So I put in my bits and pieces a very short piece, which is like a Neapolitan piece, like a tenor singing, and it's to be done that way all the way through. So it's called Neapolitan too. So that at least solves that problem for me. Now I can go on and be more adult about it. I hope.
The question he's asking was to describe the kit's notion.
Yes.
Or
Well, yes. This came from the fact that I knew and loved a dancer who was a Bharatanatyam dancer. And she danced to towels, of course, and made her own rhythms with the feet and with her gestures, mudra, and so on. But I long wanted to write a piece for her and couldn't think of a way of doing it because I'm not experienced in an Indian musician. But finally it dawned on me one time that I could make an artificial poem or just simply make a succession of rhythms that were interesting and then write them down the page like this, also they're all the same, and then make the melody. And I chose, as a matter of fact, that half note, whole note mode, 8-note mode, and wrote all of them in the same mode, of course. And some of them have tunes of different kinds in different registers. One of them goes up all the way to the flute, goes all the way up to the top, and another one comes down from the top too, so that they can be connected in this way. Many of the tunes can be repeated on 2 or 3 levels too. And then I wrote for percussion an abstract, say 3 or 4 lines, and I think I asked for tambourines in the top 2 and simply drums to the bottom 2. And this is for a single percussionist. And it also conforms to the same top, so to speak, the same rhythmical structure. Any one of the melodies can be repeated or connected with any one of the other of them, and also the same thing is true of the percussion. And they can also be omitted or repeated in any order. Well, the dancer organized a piece out of that, and actually there was a beginning piece because I called it Ariadne, and it was Ariadne abandoned, and that's a solo like an in an Indian piece, and then the jalas or the starts. And the flute player and the dancer organized what they wanted, and particularly the dancer, of course, because she was shaping the choreography. And so she decided, I'll have that one, this one, following, and the percussion you apply here, and get excited here, and so on. This is all provided for everybody. And so it's been done a number of times. It's coming up, being done. It's been recorded 2 or 3 times in different versions too. And I think it's fun, and I learned that kind of kit behavior from Henry Cowell, who did it another way, but still it's the basic idea. You know,
How many alternatives do you give the flute player or the percussionist?
in that piece, I think it's 8 each. And so that gives you a lot of combinations. It's either 7 or 8. And for Mark's last one, I think it's 10 or 11. It's more. And that is a 5-tone piece too.
Didn't Henry Cowell have a name for this thing? That sort of system. I remember reading about
I
it.
think he calls it elastic form.
Elastic form.
And
That's right.
he did one for Monte Graham, and I think he did also one for Marion Van Kyle. And I happened to help organize one of them. He was in prison at the time, and he sent us this kit. So I organized it.
Does your variation of the kit, how does it differ from his elastic form?
Well, it's the same thing, only he wrote for Barry Van Kyle. He wrote, I think, 2 actual pieces. One is a blues and one is something else. And then he gave me chords, little melodicals, rhythmicals, and so on, asked me to assemble these, which I did, and including the fixed pieces. So the whole thing was, in effect, an elastic form. I think that the ones that he did for Martha Graham are written out, say, 3-part counterpoint. This is all printed up in one piece of musicological study. At any rate, then you can say you can go from this measure to measure 12, or like that. And you can contract and expand these by that method. So that's another way of doing elastic music.
That gives the dancer some, or the choreographer
Yes,
some
exactly.
input into the way they
Right.
Richard, you have a question?
Yeah, that highlights maybe a need for new forms when we collaborate. I know I was trained in music conservatory, music oriented only. I began collaborating with dancers. I didn't know how that was going to work. I could like music, in some cases, I took a finished dance, I notated the music, and you know the dance. I tried every approach I could. And I wonder if you don't maybe use those lines the way the dancers get that sort of and I think we all probably struggle with that too. I wanted to ask about Chimeone, if you collaborated with dancers, and what kind of processes and work were you doing?
Yeah, just to reiterate what Richard said, to make sure you all heard that, is in response to the elastic form and the kit, that as dance composers, we may need to come up with some new forms that give a little more flexibility to both choreographer and dancer. And then his question was to Chinner Young, whether he had collaborated with choreographers and how he worked with them.
I had done some collaborative work with choreographers and dancers a while back when I used to live in EFT. But one particular piece that I still remember is that type of score, and that's how we survived through it. And I think at the time you are talking about 25 years ago, so, and that was a learning experience.
Yes, Paul.
I'm curious how soluble to harmonize over complete. In other words, if he's so sensitive to emotion, will there not be more interchange figures?
Well, it was going on all the time. I might have faced, I see Mark Morris dancing. And when the piece felt complete, and I had completed also doing what the only thing he actually asked me to do was to write for Yo-Yo Ma. And when I had written him a lot of music that I thought was appropriate and felt right, and then also the movements were balanced, and then finished the section for Yo-Yo Ma, it just felt complete. And they did too. They felt it was complete. Yes, yeah, right.
So do you see movement as you write music for dance?
Often.
Either of you? Often. And I was interested, you mentioned something about how your inspiration might come in the form of a dance gesture when you were talking about that empty space and receiving hints. If a hint comes to you in the form of a dance gesture, do you have any insight as to how you deal with that in your mind and how it comes forth into your tones?
I don't have at this moment any particular answer to that, but I know it is very difficult in my case. If you look at painting or you look at just a beautiful hand gesture from one A to one P or point B, you probably take 3 seconds or whatever to raise an arm. And to me, if I were to have an orchestra with me, it took me like a good 3 days, and now without my sleep just to do that. I mean that I'm talking a very tight knit type of technique. However, there are other ways too. The way just doing simple droning, doing nothing, or silent, don't do anything at all. So I don't have any specific answer to that, but something that I always want to do if I will have the opportunity to collaborate with choreographer or dancers is the slower pacing contrapuntally. And let's say, hypothetically speaking, if a piece of dance like music is approximately 20 minutes or so, somewhere starting an emphasis right here of dance gesture, but the music will somewhat vaguely echo 2 or 3 minutes later. And so within that you have a much more closer interaction, but never really synchronized to the point that almost spheric in a sense. And it's almost like it is possible to imagine that way. It's almost like a translucent moving bubbles or sculpture floating against the sunset or something like that. It's just that's the kind of way that I'm very excited about it, because otherwise you have only you only have a duality, which I think is very limited, is to have straight rhythm, so everyone can count, or to have no rhythm at all, or rhythm that does not coincide with dancers, and dancers need to coincide with the music, just fade out at the end. And to me, it's quite limited. And so that is a dream that so far never come through.
Yes, there's a question.
Hi, I'm Susan, and I'm married to Sherry. I would just like to say that.
No, I'm married to her.
Yeah. But he spends hours improvising. I mean, I've lived with him for 20 years now, and it's, days, weeks of improvising before anything gets on the paper a lot of times. And I think that a lot of composers who are, pretty much straight ahead academic composers do this. I'm just sort of interested in a discussion about this, I mean, I know Lou has all these wonderful handmade instruments in his house. I'm sure he plays with them all the time. And, I understand that you work in architecture a lot of your forms before you write, but you also must spend a lot of time just playing. And I'm wondering how important that is,
That's a great question. Let's talk about improvisation, and that is on my list. We were going to get to that, but I'm glad you asked it. Talk about improvisation and its role in your composing.
Yeah, just to be brief. I'm to hold on the idea that if one receives hint, and hint is not necessarily sound, but then you have to test it out. It means like if you were to be a sculpture making a chair that has arm and legs in a different shape, it's not the usual chair. So you just have to walk in the desert and look for material and just live with the material, and you mean testing out, it might not be worked out. You see, or sometimes it's not working out now, those sound material, 5 tone, 6 tone, or whatever. But it happens to me that 10 years later, I thought I failed, but 10 years later it re-emerged in a way, in full strength. And so, in a way, and just get off the subject a little bit, if in one's own lifespan, supposedly you have the chance to write, let's say 100 pieces, okay? Your opus 1 and 2 to 100 is not that linear. No, that's not the mind is working. Your opus 4, and then supposed to be opus 5 by the opus 17. You see, it switches around constantly like that. Yeah. So that's my thinking in regards to what Susan mentioned about improvisation. In a way, improvisation means experimenting and try things out alone, because it might not be what I call it compatible. That sound material that you want to do might not compatible, might not hold an idea, or the idea is so ambitious, or an idea just an idea having to do with music and dance, and you have to recognize that. we don't recognize that, we deny it, then just be patient and see if we can, 10 years later, that idea can be implemented into some form of sound.
I've got manuscripts around in the same condition from decades back, things that I do want to finish sometime because they didn't go then, but they might.
Oh, I have an idea, Lou. I think if it didn't go well, I have some too. Maybe we can trade. We can beat those commissions.
Well, I'm a melody composer. Everything goes melodically. But also, I must say that when I go into the house from my desk, where I sometimes outline a possible melody, I apologize to Bill for what's going to happen. That is, say I'm going to go to the piano and make a mess for a long time. He said it doesn't bother him. But he also tells people that he hears snippets of this, that, and the other thing, and he's always surprised when he hears the piece. And also, I apologize to my archivist, and Aidoo is around all the time too. But I also spend a great deal of time at the piano, or if I'm writing for gamelan, at the gamelan instruments. Yes, sure. I like the sound of it, for one thing. And also, I do have an electronic keyboard out in my little trailer where I have my desk. But I finally discovered why I don't like it. It's big enough and everything that it's an equal temperament. And I don't like that. And in my house, my piano is in the Kirnberger No. 2 temperament, which has a multiplicity of beautiful intervals. And I find that almost anything sounds better on the piano inside. So I am sooner or later lured to the keyboard inside because of that. Or the harpsichord too, same reason. But I do a lot of, sometimes a melody box. It won't complete itself. It doesn't feel as though it's going in the correct direction or something like that. And I simply have to either wait or boggle my mind about it for a while until it does take hold. In a large piece, if without even a deadline, if I'm not disturbed too much by the busyness of music in the house or anything of that sort, I go manic, and yes, for hours at a time I compose, and it never stops. It's a 24-hour thing. I wake up with it. It's going on in time. There's an apparatus inside, and it works whether you're with it or not. And sooner or later, you have to put out what it's been doing. And that's true of larger works when I'm really working hard.
It's better not turn on the radio either.
No, you hadn't. True to.
Yes, Judy.
I would like to ask composers if they would define music.
Judy Rosenberg's very difficult question is, she would like to ask the composers how they define music.
To me, it is a simple question, but it's difficult to answer. I look at this way. I think we are fortunate, granted if we have food to eat. We are very fortunate to lead two lives at one time. I mean, the creative dimension and daily life. I think music or art, any creative dimension represents a spiritual path. A spiritual path, what I mean is the ability, in a sense, that might relate to very much, or at least partially, to one's own imagination, that carry, this carry an ability to start from sort of, quote unquote, from nothing and turn the nothingness to something. And of course, I personally feel, I just on the way over here, that was the first time, I told Susan, I said that I began to realize that my music is not that strong. It's not that powerful. And I began to recognize it, and I told her in the car, and at the same time I look around that we all are not that strong. And so my statement right now at this moment, I'm just cooking up while I'm talking here, is that when we sort of make a conversion or try to translate or whatever term we want to use from idea, expression, emotion, vision, what have you, we have to recognize that there is a trade-off here. So the outcome, somewhat to my view, today represent a pair of things. So you never really hit the focus. You think and focus. You have to have the level of concentration to try to zoom in. Just one more thing that I want to add. The latest piece I wrote for percussion and cello, and they both are required with some singing and all of that. I was trying to imagine this piece, and then while during the course of the construction of the piece, passage after passage, I tried to focus on something, and really interesting. I never really hit it right there at the dot. I always circle around almost like the bees circle around the flowers. And that's probably art is, and probably what music is. And so not only that, there are layers of imagery, one passage after another, passage of dance, or passage of music, at least in this case, in this particular piece entitled Grand Ala. Sometimes I feel that I owe myself something. When I stopped composing, I said, I need to sit down and explain to myself. Okay, sometimes I do that. I don't think I should do it all the time, but sometimes I do. But I imagine in this case a lotus leaf that are not blossom. While I'm trying to focus on the A, and then the outer petal drop it right away, and the piece is not, that passage is not finished yet, and the focus B coming out, the next to inner ring falling out, and constantly. In a way, it is an offshoot of a title. I forgot what I said.
Am I to answer the question too?
Yes,
What
I
is
think
music
so.
to me? At best, it's a great pleasure. At worst, it's a damned annoyance. And a terrible chore, too. It's hard to do. And as I get older, it's harder to put the notes down or the numbers when I use the Papillon notation. Also, at its best, for me, the experience of group playing is good. I like that. This last summer, I realized again when we were in Darlington Hall in Southern Italy, we'd have a wonderful British breakfast, enough to keep the empire going, and then we would go and play for 2 hours Javanese gamelan. Oh, it was wonderful. And I realized, of course, that gong was to die for. Oh. It was wonderful. So I miss group activity when I'm not doing it. And for me, the most pleasant form of group activity is Javanese gamelan. And mind you, I'm only an amateur actor, so I can teach beginners. I'm still an amateur. I don't play in dare professionally or on my own.
In line with this group playing, how does the influx of dancers make you feel about your music? Does it make you happy in the same way that group playing does?
Well, yes, it does. And right now, I'm reviving a work which I did when I first went to San Jose State, which was years ago. They gave me a big party and a big auditorium. And I took a large percussion piece of mine called Labyrinth for 11 players and hundreds of instruments. And added chorus. This was all to combine everybody. And added chorus with a tenor soloist and choreography for a large group. And it was called Orpheus, and it was on a text by the poet Robert Duncan, From the Singer to the Dance, it's called. And it is about the relation between the dance of life and the individual, the singer. And of course, to me, music is a song and a dance, so that felt very natural. Well, I'm in the process of revising and working that with the original director, and we're going to present it among my many birthday parties. And the 80s, and it's just keeping track of the calendar is hard. But the one at San Jose State will include this big work, so I'm involved in reworking and also the score is being computerized, or computer-aided, what you say, so that it comes out looking, the way they do now.
Well, I know as a composer for dance, there's always an interesting kind of interplay that works between the movement, the choreography, and the music. And oftentimes I know that when I finish a piece of dance music, it may not feel completed without the dance. That the dance really is kind of an interlocking piece. I'm sure a lot of you out here have that same experience. Correct me if I'm wrong. And it'd be interesting just to hear how both of you, if you have any experience like that your music may not be able to stand on its own without choreography. I heard you pulling a suite out of the dance, Mark Morris. Do you have any thoughts on?
Well, he hasn't done. Well, he may have done the choreography. I can't say at this point. I'm looking forward to all of it. Incidentally, from the other side of it, I've only encountered one dance that I could not provide music for. I tried 3 times. It was a solo dance by a friend of mine, Carol Beals, in San Francisco. This was a long time ago, in the late 30s, and she called it 3 Dances of Conflict. And I simply could not. I tried one score, then I tried another score, then I tried third score, and I decided no, the dance is self-sustaining, and there's no way I can add to it or subtract from it, and nothing I could do. It's the only dance I've encountered to which I could not really contribute a little something. Is that?
Was this performance done in silence?
Yes, yes. Well, except an occasional needle you could hear, but that's all. Yeah, it was done in silence. But the imagery and the kinetic response was so powerful that there was nothing that the other part of the ear could contribute. Incidentally, I have gone into a bar years and years ago and almost fell over because the sound was so terrific. It apparently dislodged my balance sense too. Just simple volume did it.
I'm interested in microtonality, microtonal aspect of your composition. You're dealing mostly with Western musicians, I assume. How do you get them to adjust their ears to hear the intervals, and what do you base your microtonal systems on? I mean, do you base on overtone series, and also how do you notate it?
Well, my microtonality is not of the kind that is usually expected, where you hear very fine intervals and maybe very dissonant intervals at all. In fact, I approach from the other side. It's towards greater consonance and ease. And I am well versed in everything from the overtone series from the early Henry Cowell New Musical Resources through Harry Parch, and then my own experiments, and the later studies from various historical periods in the West and in other places. Bill and I have created a number of instruments for the specific purpose of getting good intervals. The real problem is to get good intervals, the ones that are true, the ones that mean what they say, and that are the smallest proportion for that particular spatial interval, or for the interval, the tonal interval. And that's what I prefer.
Are they fixed pitches or
Are they what?
fixed pitches or fixed?
Well, sometimes, yes, unless, for example, I'm playing Peters, where I can move the pitches too. But Bill and I have made tunings for gamelan, different ones, in different tunings, but they're just tunings. Incidentally, that does not dismay Indonesians who approve these gamelan tunings. And in fact, the pelog for two of the gamelans was chosen by Pak Chokro, the affectionate name for Wasili Diningrat, out of one of my experiments. Bill made me a metallophone, which gives the up to the, is it 32? The first 32 overtones of a low cello D. And there are slabs with resonations. And it's quite wonderful to hear the entire overtone series up through 32. And one day in my office, I was playing around, because by this time I thought that maybe there was a pelog tuning, that's a particular Javanese tuning, in the upper overtones, you know? And so I was playing it, and there was a knock on my door, and there stood Pak Chokro, who said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm hunting for a pelog in the upper overtones." He said, "Play the last one you played." So I did. And it was, I listened to it very carefully, and he said, "It's a good pelog." He said, "What's more, it would be good with voice. It'd be easy to sing to." Well, if you'd have told me up to that point that singing overtones, now let's see, where does it begin? 12, 13, 14, 17, 18, 19, and 21 was easy, I'd have said, no way. But the first time, I've just done Pak Chokro's say so. We tuned the pelog that way for the whole gamelan. And sure enough, the first piece we did with Gerong and Cindy was like falling off a log. And Pak Chokro, as always, was right, of course. So there are surprises here. And if you think of higher overtone combinations, for example, other peoples in various parts of the world have negotiated those maybe some time ago and found them to be good, or not good, as the case may be.
So if I can ask another question, if you, when you write the scales for specific instruments, I understand how that would work, but say you were composing for a violin, so here you approach it from that aspect as far as composing a piece for traditional Western instruments, one you wouldn't play particular
Yes, well, thank you. I've written and have become very well known for using Western soloists with gamelan of other tunings and in different ways. The reason for this is that it is, for some Western instruments, for example, a valve instrument, you can adjust those valves to particular pitches in the gamelan, and then all they have to do is press them and out it comes. But the violin is another matter. It has to go through the ear and then come out in the fingers. Now, I have, to my surprise, found that that is easier, for the most part, for Americans, and at least the Americans I know. They listen, they finger it, and they play it. And sometimes that's pretty complex, what I'm asking. Also, I have asked, for example, in a score of mine for solo violin with the C. Betty Slendro, I've asked for the accidentals between the wide instruments, wide intervals. For example, between a 7 to 6, I have asked for a sharp in there. And my soloist got exactly the right one. And so it's the ear and the coordination between the ear and in this instance. The French horn, again, vowels. The viola is again the ear. What else have I written for? Piano, you just tune the piano.
You do the trombone too?
Yes, yes. Well, a friend of mine did the trombone, and yes, that's perfectly possible and has been done. And the piano, you just tune to the gamelan in that case. Huh? Yes, the saxophone can do that, and yes, I've written a lascivious piece for for saxophone with the epilogue of Sibeli and also Mills gamelan. In fact, a reviewer said that it gave an attractive wash of the cadence to that part of the concert.
Yes, Africa.
Yes, I heard, I believe I attended a workshop somewhere, I don't remember where it was, where there was supposed to be disparity between the standard A440 pitches, and then I think there was another one that they were trying to deal with, I think it was A236 or yes. Now, would it be more advantageous for you, the composer, and for you, for the musician, to play a composition that was tuned to the A236 or the A440? Would it be more advantageous?
Well, I have a story about that, if it's all right. Bill and I very carefully made recordings with an A440 reference for the Stuttgart, the Beethoven Orchestra, for my piece called At the Tomb of Charles Ives, in which there's a small passage in freestyle, that is to say there's no reference point. There are interval relationships through it, both vertical and horizontal. And so the problem was, of course, for the musicians to learn it, and they had no reference point. So Bill and I carefully tuned up instruments, recorded it with a reference point to A440, and we sent them off. It was everything that you needed to know to memorize that passage. And Dennis Russell Davies called back and thanked us very much. And they had raised it to A445. You can do that technically, but it was all there, and the orchestra customarily played at A445, so that's what they did. So it could go up and down. And again, I had violin soloists who played at A440 in gamelan, epilogue, and then another gamelan in which, for example, the note B is somewhere nothing, and things like that. But again, it's the ear and the hand or whatever you're dealing with.
Well, I wonder, as you talk about how the violinists were able to just get that tuning. Some of these tunings, I think, resonate in our bodies in a very different way. Well, they all resonate in our bodies in a very different way. Equal temperament. I know I've spent a lot of years playing harpsichord and using different tunings. And once you come back to equal temperament from a just tuning, your ears are in a state of shock because you think, oh my gosh, everything is out of tune.
Yeah.
And it's a really quite a jarring experience. And I'm wondering if tuning and tonality might be another thing to consider for the composer of dance, and how that tuning and tonality might resonate in a dancer's body. You are crossing your...
Yes, I crossed my finger because I was asked to do a fairly large work with the San Jose State Dance Department. And we got there for early rehearsals, and I realized that they were, I guess, neon or something or other. Fluorescent without, what do they call that? The thing that prevents that. Ballast or something or other. At any rate, they were buzzing so strongly that there was no getting around that pitch. You couldn't do anything that wasn't complicated by that pitch. And what was that pitch?
Well, it's
Yeah, around there. So I thought, well, now I can't cope with this as a composer and my instrument son. If you can't conquer them, join them. So I tuned everything to... What else can you do? So that's what happened, that general pitch.
I'm wondering if you've ever had a choreographer ask you to put something like on a pair tuning where they wanted the beat created by that pair tuning has something to do with the rhythm of the beat. Or have you created something that around that idea?
The question is whether choreographers have ever asked for a certain tuning where the resultant beats between two pitches, I assume you're saying, have something to do with the rhythm of the piece itself.
Especially with gong, they always seem to have a
Especially
pulse
with
that,
gong.
that to me is, it works very well with certain rhythms in dance and others not.
Jimmy, does that problem arise or interest arise?
My interest doesn't seem to be right.
Well, I have not been asked, and also I don't deal with paired tunings. I'm a Java man, not a Bali man. I go to Bali for recreation, but not for. Yeah, and I was just going to say that once I was in a foundry in Java, Central Java, and it was wonderful. We went through from a puddle of heated gong metal right up through, and there was a man with a gong, and he would take a sort of paste which was ash and wet from the floor, and he put it on the gong, and gradually the ombak went up faster and faster. Bright-eyed, looked at him and I said, "Bali?" And he said, "Yes." Because the Balinese like about 7 per, whereas in Java it's 3 maybe. And yeah, it can be controlled, but I've never been raced. By the way, there is a passage in Antheil's music book. I've forgotten what it's called, George Antheil's book, in which he relates musical patterns to general rhythms and dance tempi. I cannot remember the exact reference, but it's there and it might interest you. But no, I've never encountered the penny rock and dances.
John?
Kirkus I asked a question, if we truly look, can we listen? If we truly listen, can we look? And I wonder what your thoughts on that might be in relationship to seeing choreography on stage.
The question is, Gertrude Stein asked the question, if we truly listen, can we look? And if we truly look, can we listen? And this is the question that has been
Yeah, it's
posed here.
I think there must be numerous answers, but through my experience since the 80s, I have been collaborating with the native Cambodian refugee musicians, and I taught myself the native xylophone and both line. And we constantly, to be literal, we constantly watch and look at dancers show. Because in a piece like I performed only once the Cambodian version of Ramayana. It's supposedly 3 days, 3 evenings or so. But at the time it was in Washington D.C., so we shortened it to 90 minutes non-stop of music and playing and dancing. It's a really very rigorous piece of art. Constantly watching cues, constantly moving, constantly estimating the tempo. If it's too slow, their knees going to fall apart because they have to stand on one leg, and it's a really amazing thing. And yes, the answer is both. This answer you have to look, watch, feel, timing, breathing with them. You see, and hopefully give beside tempo and sonority and so forth.
I would tend to think that there's a third thing hidden there, looking at decor and things like that. That's different from receiving and having a kinetic response. I've gone off a chair because Jose Limon took a leap. But that was looking and feeling. It wasn't looking at something like a painting or something like that. So it's different, I think. What we're talking about is dance people. The looking is
Were you aware of the music at the time that you were actually there?
yes, yeah, it was Rigger's New Dance, I think, yeah.
And certainly, just want to add one footnote here. From my experience, by playing with, performing to accompany dancers or collaborating with dance group, it's probably dictated from the tradition of that in the Eastern world. You lose your identity, your individuality, and that's probably the way to do it. You are in ensemble, and ensemble is the whole thing totality. You are with the dancers, it's part of it. And at some point, it's not exaggerated, I hope, that almost like sometimes I experience, and some other musicians too, like you doing the work during the course of performing the piece, and you are watching yourself from distance. It is always a tendency of that. And of course, you shouldn't dwell on that so much, you probably lose the technical thing. You see. But once in a while, it's an in-to-out type of mode that maybe we don't have any control of that.
Yes, one more question. I think I'm going to have to stop.
Can you email the topic about philosophy? Or they have philosophy? I'm wondering if you find some of your authors are influencing you about philosophy.
The question is if there have been any authors that have influenced these two composers. Philosophical authors, there's other ones, writers, I assume, right? Writers of language.
To me, is the upbringing that involved in the rice field in Cambodia village. The authors probably were all there, the rice field, the fish, the frog, or the gamelan, and wherever you go, shamanism. At night you can hear the drumming. There's exorcism going on. People in trance. I mean, those were my authors. Those was my background as a kickoff. Until now, that does not mean that I always try to focus on that. Now, in a much larger picture, when I left Cambodia and came to this country in 1964, enrolled as a freshman student in New York City. Later on, years later, I began to be interested in my own native culture. It's here. That's where I learned Cambodian cooking. That's where I learned Cambodian music and Asian music. Then that was the first formal educational situation that I placed myself to read Buddhist sutras in English, of course. So, and since then, beyond Asia, I began to expand it. Yes, to respond to your question, the whole cultural elements, the philosophy, the aesthetics, and all of that, always in my heart. However, for better or worse, as a composer in this country, I'm using Western techniques, Western orchestras, Western instruments to express certain thoughts.
Do you have any authors that you like?
Well, a lot of them. I don't know.
So early on.
What?
So early on.
For me?
So early on.
That's some of your
Yeah, Whitman, Blake, Gertrude Stein. Yeah, well, earlier than that, I read Kant and Schopenhauer, and I've read a lot of science. I keep that going. I find it much more interesting than anything else. Astronomy and botany and all sorts of it. I subscribe to Science News. I'm eager to get it every week. I'm part of the Planetary Society and so on. Yeah, I keep it going. Science interests me rather more. I too am an author.
Yes, you've written a nice book of poetry you might want to look at.
Yes, and a book about music too.
Right, right.
Yes.
It's time for us to stop. I hope that this broader focus, getting a little bit outside of the narrow focus of music for dance, music in the class. Just as Chinny was talking about the frogs and the night music in Cambodia influence, those were his influences. Hopefully some of these little broader questions can come back and help us and influence us in our work in dance and in life. So I think we would like to give these two gentlemen a wonderful round of applause. Three gentlemen. And I believe, I don't know if you're going to, I assume you all have lunch with us, so they're wonderful, friendly people, so enjoy their company. And thank you very much.
Before you leave, some of you have indicated that you were interested in showing scores to Lou and or Chinnery. I need to meet with you now.
You'll find lunch right outside the door, by the way.
You write an X, and then you write